So, what's next? Well, after all of this so far, the original Goron, the monster that never thinks twice film, the comic Goron Monster Warfare, the sequel film, The Return of Goron, the novelised adaptation of the original movie, and of course the comic book that was, you guessed it, Tales of the Contagion the Host, a spin-off comic to the main series so far, if you will. Directions have become rather, misguided recently. Towards obviously the end of 2024, things were different in the kaiju landscape. There were far more successful normal films and other fan films just like Goron, who were doing over 10, no, even 20 times better than the original, which was seen as one of, if not the most successful part of the franchise up until this point. And Goron was failing to keep up pretty badly. The franchise was struggling, and since it had been months since Tales of the Contagion the Host had actually been released, they had fallen behind by quite a lot, and JJS was struggling rapidly at the moment to keep up. Not only that, but Zilla 2004, one of the main inspirations of the franchise up until that very point, had unfortunately left YouTube for at least a long period of time. Why? Well, he was simply pursuing a career in music and AMV creation, another excellent form of art that I think you should check out. But either way, this still helped JJS's struggle even worse. It made it even worse, and he was struggling to pump out even the bare minimum from what was seen. And so, a third comic was made, that being The Rise of Goron. Now, this comic was a direct sequel comic taking place in between the events of obviously the confirmed third film and the second film, that being The Return of Goron. The Rise of Goron was its own thing, nicknamed Trog during its developmental progress. The Rise of Goron was just a quick sequel comic, about 10 to 15 pages in length, and picked up immediately after Goron had killed and finished off with the Astrophius life form. Now, in this moment in time, Goron was obviously severely injured, and that's how our story starts. He's still in that 100 meter tall, supercharged, hyper-powerful state. Electricity and energy coursing through his veins, but at the same time, he had suffered the most extreme of his wounds yet. However, this comic is actually where Goron gains a lot of radical new abilities too, to make him even stronger. Goron travels to a radical new island where he ends up encountering a huge swarm of giant car-sized spiders nicknamed the Colony Shapers. Goron fights off and eventually kills off every single Colony Shaper from this original hive mind until he reaches a huge underground cavern. And this cavern is filled to the brim with giant rocks and obviously huge stalagmites. But Goron is not deterred. He searches through, beating the monster that never thinks twice, and that's where he encounters it. A second swarm of Colony Shapers, but they're not alone this time. They have their queen, the Webmaker, by their side. And what was just Goron's search for peace on the planet now turned into a secondary war that he had to fight. Goron fights the Webmaker, who proved a powerful threat, and that was obviously multiplied considering the fact that, it was amplified due to the fact that Goron was fighting the Webmaker in an enclosed and hidden area where no one could come to help or stop this battle like last time. And this time Goron was struggling. This cavern had been inherited by the Webmaker for hundreds, possibly thousands of years, up until this very quintessential point. And now, she had been very adept to fighting off enemies in this point, and it seemed like Goron was about to lose. He used his second weapon, a giant stalagmite which he ripped from the ground using his insane strength, throwing the 30,000 ton, 40 to 45 metre tall spider to the ground, and then finally finishing her off by impaling her with the stalagmite in the exact same way that he had just finished off his previous opponent, Astrophius. Now, the Rise of Goron does not add a lot to the franchise, sure, and it's only like a third comic expansion still. But another thing that makes it important is obviously it was JGS testing out a new form, and obviously a brand new form of content, and attempting to revive Goron back into that limelight by confirming the continuation of the series. The Rise of Goron did extremely well, and that only further helped develop the third film to finish off the original Goron trilogy. Despite being intended for more films, business was rough at that point, and by then they were struggling, so they had to finish off with a bang, and that was Goron vs. Melbelius, Goron's first versus movie. Now, original taglines for the film nicknamed it Green vs. Red, and obviously a lot of people knew that Goron would return into this new JJS project, because just like that, he would. He'd be unlike anything seen before. So, how was this film made? Well, after studying fourth dimensional constructs instead of just third dimensional constructs, and finally expanding knowledge into things like power scaling, which would matter into a cinematic universe like this one, he had finally started to build on this storyline. Our story begins just less than a mere year after the Rise of Goron comic and the Return of Goron film, where Goron is obviously attacking Houston, Texas for no known reason. A pilot flies over and attempts to use bunker buster bombs, which were the original weapons used against the original Goron that worked, to kill this Goron. And it seemed like it would work, but it only merely teased this far more durable Goron. Oh, and by the way, the abilities introduced to Goron's character included extreme regeneration, which helped him regenerate massively. Whilst Goron might not be the most durable of monsters, as his skills aren't as quite refined as someone like Godzilla's or Gamera's, he actually is a lot more regenerative and can regenerate massive chunks of his body in less than 5 minutes, which is immense. As long as his brain remains fully intact, this process is possible. Another feature is, of course, his ability to show slight signs of empathy during. How is this even possible? Well, it's simply because obviously Goron's creational process might have used mammalian DNA too, which has been revealed by Goron vs. Melbelius, so let's continue. After laying waste to Houston, Texas, it turns out that Goron sensed another monster living beneath the city, and that monster would appear 5 years later in 1980 after the prologue of this film. By 1980, Ned meets up with Hunter and Robert, and obviously with the assistance of General and operatives from the previous film, we have a new reunited group of 5. And this sounds like a cool idea to have them meet up on a new island, but they end up encountering 2 things. First of all is the new stem variant known as the Giant Stem. The Giant Stem ends up attacking them along the shorelines, and ends up nearly killing them until a new juvenile Goron appears out of nowhere. They originally think it's a second generation Goron from the last film, but he has no stomach shell like that variant, indicating a much more younger age and a less developed body. He's still obvious, not only that, but he lacks the eyebrows too, and he's probably less than half the size, anywhere from 30 to 40 meters in height only. Whereas Goron that we know is 80 to 100 meters in height. Goron Jr. is what they nickname him, or Junior for short. And Junior ends up taking down the Giant Stem by biting into it and ripping it in half. a new way of a Goron killing its prey. Anyways, a lot happens after that, so let's see. They end up leaving the island and reporting the battle, but not only that, people do believe them, but they also don't believe that there's a third new Goron in this universe surviving to the present day. Anyways, this new giant monster appears, this being Melbelius, and starts causing mass destruction all over the show. Melbelius is a massive threat who possesses unforeseen abilities. So first of all, who even is Melbelius? Well, first, it's Goron's oldest and most powerful opponent yet. 140 meters in height, or around the same height as Astrophius, but even more cunning and even more powerful. Melbelius is a giant red monster resembling Goron, but not quite. Melbelius can teleport, although this does have a cooldown period that takes some time in order to regenerate his fallen energy. Laser eyes, which obviously manifest from his eyes, and each one obviously creates a beam of up to 1 million degrees of heat and pure power, which can scorch Goron's skin, burn him, and then knock him to the ground immediately after, which he does during their first confrontation. Huge sharp claws which are used to tear into Goron's flesh and Goron Jr.'s flesh too. So, after Goron fights this creature for the first time, Goron Jr. hops in and ends up helping Goron up, but with the two giant monsters challenging Melbelius as a familial pair. They end up scaring him off and bond by hugging over the coast of a new island. After all of that, Melbelius begins to head to the city, and Goron Jr. follow him down to finish him off for one second and final battle. These two fighting for a long time whilst operatives in general have to dig through water, look for things, and then barely reach their way off the surface after a new confrontation with Gabrielle, who's hinted to have joined a terrorist organisation since the events of the original film and the original novelisation of that said film. Obviously, Goron and Junior fight Melbelius for even longer, and Goron is pinned on the ground, but after spitting his acidic spray into Melbelius' mouth, it stuns him for quite a bit of time, allowing Goron to get up and, with the assistance of his son, overpower Melbelius. After all of that, both teams of monsters are incredibly injured, and here's the thing about Melbelius. He's not as malicious as other monsters. Well, at least in this timeline he isn't. And he actually decides to bow to Goron, finally giving up his battle once and for all. I know it's very anticlimactic as to how Melbelius wins originally, but obviously that's just how things went. After bowing to Goron and his son rule over the world, whereas Melbelius hibernates back underground, presumably underneath the city of Houston, Texas again, or maybe even hibernating on one of those islands that we've seen throughout the last 3 or so installments of said franchise, The Rise of Goron, The Return of Goron, and this film too. And so that brings us to the end of this Goron franchise, also U4. So, that was it. The last confirmed Goron movie. And it ended with an underwhelming, anticlimactic ending. So, how do we continue after this point? Well, as it turns out, 2 years later, Goron got a massive new reboot named Goron Cataclysm. A film that had been planned for 2 years and was finally made, but it was more of a standalone movie meant for itself and itself only. More of a love letter to the Goron franchise, and more of, again, the 4th and final installment to this franchise, or so we thought. And now let's look at that film as the final piece. After gathering up energy, and after losing the original Goron models due to obviously their moulding over time when locked away into a storage unit, so therefore we lost the original Goron Jr. model and Melbelius model despite a sequel maybe being planned but not confirmed yet. Now, Goron ended up appearing in a new film with a brand new model built for him in order to obviously appear in this film. So let's see. Our main character appears as a man called Johnson, or Mr. Johnson, but we will analyse him later. The film begins with a whale being hunted and brutally killed by Goron off the coast of the shoreline. We then find out that a dead body of a pilot has been found, and Johnson and his group known as the Green Pincher are currently studying this in the year of 1990. They end up travelling all the way to the new Monsterland, which is finally named Isla Monstera on screen for the first time. They reach the island and find Goron where they fight him brutally. They end up defeating him with huge bombs. After this, obviously Johnson wants news coverage over this, but he just gets humiliated and called a joke until he is visited by Operation X, who attempt to ridicule him by interviewing him in public and then confirming him that this actually is real, and if he speaks to anyone about the monster's existence again, there will be massive repercussions for him and the people working within his business, that is a Green Pincher. Despite not wanting to be shut up, the group's obviously terrified because this monster could appear in the nearest city, that is London City, at any time, and no one could do anything about it. But nonetheless, Goron ends up continuing, and he ends up reaching London City, where he breached through the military's defence force, despite Operation X attempting to hide it so badly. They ended up failing in the Operation X in this timeline, and so failing really badly. The main members of Operation X are killed during Goron's attack, and Goron attacks and decimates London City, but actually survives, leaving us with a bleak representation of the future of this universe. A future that was never continued and left to the interpretation of the viewer. And just like that, that was the end of the fourth and final supposed installment of the Goron franchise. 4 films, a novelised adaptation and 3 comics, 8 pieces of media. Known, yeah. Although technically 7. And just like that, that is the end. Hopefully you enjoyed my documentary on the making of Goron. And if anything else is made, then this film will have to get a second part. The making of Goron Chapter 2 maybe. Who knows? But for now, I am JJS, Just Jurassic Studios, and this is the end of my interpretation of my monster's history from 2023 to 2026. Goodbye.